Welcome to the Obesity Matters Wellness Workshop, where we embark on an incredible journey together towards better health and wellness. Whether this is your first time or you have been with us since the beginning, we are so grateful that you are here. My name is Rachel. I'm the Vice Chair of Obesity Matters and your host for this year-long program. I am thrilled today to welcome back a couple of folks that you may remember from some of our past Obesity Matters events, Maryam Naslafkih and Dr. Jeff Alfonsi. Today, we're going to talk about nutrition pathways and one of my favorite topics, crafting your ideal food philosophy. So welcome to you both, Maryam and Jeff.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be back talking about this important concept with Maryam. And so really, we're going to go over three main objectives in this talk. We'll talk about some of the food philosophies, and we'll definitely explain more what we mean by food philosophies as we go along. We're going to talk a little about how do you pick the right philosophy for you. I think that's a really important takeaway from here is, how do we kind of set you up with the patterns and the philosophies that are best for you and your goals. And then we'll definitely touch on things on just how to stay on top of these. To begin, in terms of a kind of a food philosophy, right? And this is basically different ways to kind of view food and life. And we're going to talk about kind of different types of patterns of philosophy. So this will be Mediterranean diet, something called Flexitarian, and low carb diet. Now, one of the things that I've even used here is I've talked about diet multiple times with Mediterranean diet, low carb diet. But we do want to kind of shift away from that word diet because it's, we don't really want to, diet, I think, doesn't really capture the whole essence of this. We want to shift to the philosophies and the patterns, and it doesn't have to be exactly following all these prescriptively, right? So I think that's a big point, although the words are often classified with diet. I think we really get at the fact of how do we shift to that bigger philosophy. And so first philosophy that we're going to talk about is the Mediterranean food philosophy. And this, actually the initial research to support the Mediterranean food philosophy started back in about the 1960s. And one of the key findings was that there was lower rates of heart disease or what we call cardiovascular disease, and they were linked to fewer deaths from cardiovascular disease. And people in Mediterranean countries such as Greece, when they actually compared that to other parts of the world, such as Northern Europe or the United States. And so I think that's what kind of was the initial kind of observation and led to further research studies of the diet pattern. And we continue to obviously see this being a very high studied and very interesting food philosophy.
One thing to note about the Mediterranean food philosophy is that it's more of a lifestyle. There's no set plan in place, but it focuses on a few characteristics. So, for example, we want carbohydrates that are rich in fibers. So we're looking at those whole grains, at those legumes, those fruits, and protein sources that are high in healthy fats, such as fish, eggs, nuts and seeds, some olive oil, and some moderate amount of dairy, and a limited amount of added sugars and red meat. So we tend to focus less on those highly processed foods and more on those whole foods. One thing to consider as well is to share meals and to enjoy a regular exercise. So that whole social component of food, of sitting down, sharing a meal with loved ones, being present when we eat, those are all things that are also important. And like I said, it doesn't give a guideline around how many calories, and it really focuses on it being a lifestyle, having the colorful fruits and vegetables on your plate and enjoying all of them.
Something called the Flexitarian food philosophy. And really, it simply put, it's kind of like a semi-vegetarian diet, right? So you're kind of combining those two concepts of kind of being flexible and also being a vegetarian. And so it's really encouraging people to have predominantly plant-based foods. But there's still times where they're going to allow for meat and other animal products in moderation.
Just like the Mediterranean food philosophy, it is more of a lifestyle. So there's no clear-cut rules when it comes to the calorie counting and the macronutrients. And I think that it once again has that flexibility, like its name indicates it, but you can start slow. If you come from a family of meat, potato, vegetable, you can start by having a meatless Friday, where you get creative and you use plant-based protein types of foods. And while the Mediterranean food philosophy focused a lot more on the source of fats, the Flexitarian it really focuses more on the source of protein so that they come from plants. But both of them are more of a lifestyle. So we want to focus on plant-based foods, those plant-based protein, like those beans, those legumes, the tofu, tempeh. I find that nowadays there's so many options that are already made as well. So if you want to try something out and you don't really have the skills to prep it, you can already have a good taste of it. But once again, we focus on the least processed food as possible, and we can incorporate animal products from time to time. You know, if you like milk in your coffee, put some milk in your coffee, type of thing. If you want to enjoy a burger on the barbecue in the summertime, go ahead and do it. But keeping in mind that the majority of the time, that the protein source comes from plants.
Excellent. So now we're going to move on to the third dietary philosophy, or sorry, food philosophy. And this one is going to be the low carb. Now, a couple kind of just differentiators around here. So this is really the idea of minimizing or being mindful of the amount of carbohydrates that you have as a percentage of, let's say, your total caloric intake for the day. And so this could be that oftentimes Health Canada says, you know, targeting, I think about 45 to 60% of your calories would come from carbohydrates. But in the kind of lower carb food philosophies, we're restricting that down to somewhere around 10 to 30% of the overall calories that come in. Sorry, it's 45 to 65% is what the normal range is. So we're trying to target a little bit lower into that 10 to 30% range in the low carb food philosophy.
Just like Jeff mentioned, so we're trying to reach that 10 to 30% of our calories coming from carbohydrates, and carbohydrates are those foods, those potatoes, those whole grains, fruits, and we want to limit those foods in that philosophy. So of course, from added sugars, sweets, starches from bread and pasta, but also from fruits and refined grain. And we want to increase that intake of protein and healthy fats and vegetables to feel more full. We can also notice a lot of presence of low calorie foods, and a lot of people can kind of can look at the low carb diet and then compare it to the keto diet, but there's a difference in terms of that the keto diet is a very low carbohydrate diet. It's high in fat, and the goal of the keto diet is to produce nutritional ketosis, where our body runs out of carbohydrates completely and use fats as its main fuel. So the difference is that it's not so restricted in carbs compared to keto.
So now in terms of picking the right philosophy for you, and I think we've talked about 3 philosophies here. There's definitely other ones, and also we've talked that, you know, there's room to modify within some of these, or there's some flexibility in them. And I think that's probably the one thing is these core philosophies, I think, are helpful for you to set some kind of markers for you to stick with, but you don't necessarily have to follow it to a T, right? You can modify a little bit, you can tweak it, you can make it more acceptable to your family or to cost considerations or flavor palette, right? So I think that's one of the key takeaways that this is about. And if you really look at some of across multiple of these food philosophies, there may be certain patterns that come up again or that overlap between the two, right? And so we wanted to kind of present these different ones because these are common ones. And they are talking about a range of different approaches so that you can see these variations. But I really do encourage you to think about a lot of the fundamentals that are going into these. So more whole foods, right? If you can, maybe more plant-based, depending on the philosophy, you know, flexitarian versus this, and take into account your own kind of health considerations. It may be something that you want to speak to a dietitian or other healthcare provider about to kind of work through based on your actual situation, your health conditions, your health goals, which one of these might be the best. And again, you could take one as kind of the predominant pattern that you want to take, but you can modify that a little bit to find something that works for you. Another key point is that you could actually I think Mariam brought this earlier, something that you can actually fit into your life, that you can stick to, right? That's really a key principle. And that's going to be acceptable if you're cooking for others in the household. How, is it extra work for you? Does it fit in? Is it something that they can also have? So I think those are some of the key patterns that I think this is important to think about. Is just your health, what works for you, what you like, cost, and all these factors that come in, and you try to work through that to find the philosophy that works for you. And just to say this again, you don't have to fully follow any one philosophy. You can use them as guides. You might prefer to just take one because it's easy and you really like it. But if there's parts that don't work for you, that's okay. You can try to modify that. You can, again, speak with others about how you could maybe make some of those changes. And again, thinking about, can I stick with this in 2 months, in 6 months, in a year, in 2 years, right? Because the whole idea of building that philosophy, it could definitely tweak and modify over time, but it should be something that you think that's really going to stick with you, that you're going to enjoy, and it's going to help you achieve your goals and fit into your life.
What's the big difference between Mediterranean and the Flexitarian philosophy?
In the Mediterranean food philosophy, we focus a lot on protein options that are really high in those healthy fats. So let's say the fish, the nuts, and the seeds, but it allows for meat, and it allows for dairy, and it allows for those animal products like fish and eggs. Whereas a flexitarian diet, we want to focus on most of our protein choices are plant-based. When it's not the case for the Mediterranean diet includes plant-based and animal-based products with no limitations when it comes to the animal-based products. Let's say red meat is limited to once a week. But when it comes to the others, it really offers that, you can add eggs every single day and it's okay.